Good morning, Magic. I'm Gavin Verhey from Wizards of the Coast and the Pauper format panel. All of us on the panel have been monitoring the format and wanted to provide you all with a bit of a check-in. Overall, the format has felt stable and there has been plenty of variety, but a few decks have been taking up a lot of play and discussion recently, and we wanted to take the opportunity during this BNR update day to talk about those. While no cards are being banned today in Pauper, there are some cards and decks we have our eyes on. Would love to hear your feedback, so we thought we'd take you behind the scenes as to what we're talking about and hear your thoughts. What are the cards and what might you be able to expect going forward? Let's dig in. Okay, so when it comes to people talking about the format, a lot of the largest concerns people have right now revolve around three decks: Mono Red, Glee Combo, and Affinity. Now, Pauper continues to be quite diverse, with so many other kinds of decks being successful, from Terror to Mono White to Elves to Fairies to Boggles to Dredge to Ponza. Well, you get the idea. There's a lot you can play with. But these three decks have been getting a lot of play, so let's focus on these three for now. First, let's talk about Mono Red. This is the most played deck in leagues, so you're liable to play against it a lot. And for good reason. It's fast and explosive, but doesn't sacrifice the ability to finish you off if the game goes long. And just like Clockwork, it's got a new pickup from Duskmourn in Clockwork Percussionist, which added fuel to the fire. So it's the most played deck. Yes, you have to be ready for it. And league incentives are to finish matches fast, so makes sense. However, its league win rate sits at about 52%. Despite being everywhere in leagues, it only sits just slightly above a 50-50 match win percentage. Now, it does carry a higher game 1 win percentage, something we have taken as a sign of polarity to knock the deck in the past, as we talked about when we banned Monastery Swiftspear. It's unfavored against Affinity in the first game, but other than that, it's ahead against the most other played decks in the first game. Of course, in games 2 and 3, that can change pretty dramatically, as is often the case with Mono Red. This is certainly on the line for action, giving our past stances, and something we've talked about taking action on. If we were to hit a card, there are a few potential options. The package of Goblin Bushwhacker and Kuldotha Rebirth is what gives it both its explosive energy and the ability to close games going long out of nowhere by dealing at least 8 damage from hand. Another plausible target for a smaller knock is Goblin Tomb Raider. Goblin Guide, when combined with Great Furnace, is just such a strong additional tool for this deck that has helped it come out of the gates so fast. All that said, a playable red deck is generally important for Health of Eternal formats. It keeps slower strategies in check, and the line between playable and not can be a razor's edge. And removing Rebirth or Bushwhacker could drop this deck below the line. What would you want to see happen here? The next deck to talk about is Glee. Since Modern Horizons 3, the sadistic Glee combo of Brood Scale with the Glee to create infinite mana and an infinitely large creature has become a larger and larger portion of the metagame. It's now the second most popular deck in leagues, just slightly behind Mono Red. However, when you look at the league data, once again, this deck's win rate is nothing extraordinary. Looking at many thousand games, it comes to 51.5%. It would again not be enough to call for action. However, the presence of a cheap 2-card combo, a Splinter Twin, if you will, is a huge addition that is format warping. You have to be prepared for it, and this deck only gets stronger as people keep refining it and figuring out how to make it resilient. The play pattern alone is concerning and not the most fun. If we were to ban a card here, it would likely be the Brood Scale. Glee did nothing for many years, and Brood Scale could potentially go infinite with anything like a future Glee. I would also like to take this moment to talk about Writhing Chrysalis. This powerhouse introduced in Modern Horizons 3 has been format defining. It accelerates you, blocks flyers, is big, and becomes stronger in multiples. Because of it being devoid, you can't even Blue Elemental blast it. It fuels not only this deck, but also the Red-Green Ponza deck, among others. While a powerful card, it is ultimately a mid-range creature in a format full of very efficient interaction. Having something that's good against cards like Lightning Bolt is actually healthy counterplay for a format with so many of these sorts of cheap spells. This card is likely to be here to stay, at least with what we're seeing at the moment, provided Red-Green Ponza doesn't have a huge resurgence or anything like that. Alright, let's set that deck aside and talk about the everlasting presence in the format, Affinity. It's the third most played deck, although there's a huge gap between this and the other two. This deck has been around for ages and is still always something you need to be thinking about. In leagues though, it's sitting at a 50% win rate. Wow. I know that sounds wild, but this powerhouse is essentially even against the field. While it does have some great matchups, it is behind against Terror, Glee, and Madness, 3 wildly popular decks. That said, if we changed anything else about the format, I expect that win rate would come up. So then, maybe Affinity would need a ding. We have talked about the artifact lands plenty as a huge ding, and those could still end up touched. After the last video where we talked about them substantially, the general feeling from the community was that the original should be preserved, but the Modern Horizons 2 ones could potentially go, if needed. While that is still a possible resort, there is a different card that has gained some discussion recently, Deadly Dispute. Since being printed, this card has shown up consistently and is currently used as a 4-of in Affinity, Glee, and more. While initially we were hesitant because there's just so many variations on this effect, from Eviscerator's Insight to Fanatical Offering to Reckoner's Bargain, that treasure really does a lot time and time again. From fixing mana, to being an artifact for Affinity, to just making the spell de facto cost 1 mana, the versatility has made it a Pauper all-star. Pauper has a lot of different cores and staple cards that appear across multiple decks. We don't view this as an inherent problem, whether it's Brainstorm and Shuffle effects or Core Skyfisher and Thrabin Inspector. These cores make a variety of decks work, and different decks use them in different ways. These can be fine and good for the format. However, Deadly Dispute and artifacts that draw when they go away, like Ichor Wellspring, gives that such a powerful draw engine and is self-fueling with that treasure. We could see axing this card as just a slight ding to Affinity while curbing the engines it fuels across the format. Would love to know what you think about these cards and decks. One thing to consider as you're thinking about them right now is that there's a good bit of rock, paper, scissors happening, where Glee is favored against Affinity, Affinity is favored against Red, and Red is favored against Glee. Knock any of those and the balance would be upset. So it's possible even if something doesn't meet the threshold for action now, it could after any other change. Right now, the format does look pretty good and diverse, even with those 3 decks at the top. Is it worth upsetting? What would you like to see happen? Are you happy with things as is? Let us know in the comments down below. Now, 2 more things I want to talk about while here. The first is, you might be wondering, if none of those decks are sitting above 52%, then what actually is winning? Well, plenty of other decks. Wildly enough, after all these years, Mono Blue Fairies is still cruising with about a 55% win rate. White Red Synthesizer, a deck many have been saying is poorly positioned in the meta right now, is sitting at 54%. And for a fun one, although the sample size is extremely small, Blue Black Green Poison Storm is sitting with a 58% win rate. All this is to say, there's a ton of variety out there. There's a lot you can win with in this format, and I encourage you to go and try some stuff outside the box. You might be surprised what you find. On the flip side, we do want to recognize that leagues aren't everything. There have been major real-life events and challenges featuring plenty of these decks, boasting different win percentages than seen here. This is a large sample size, but it's not the only sample size. Okay, one last thing. Let's talk a bit about format history here, and I promise it's relevant. Pauper really got its start on Magic the Gathering Online. An accessible way to play, it was eventually codified as a format. Anything common on Magic Online was legal to play. As the format grew, people began trying it in paper as well. And hey, it's pretty fun. But there was one weird quirk. What legality list should be used? Should it be the list of cards as printed on Magic Online, where cards like Chanter's Edict exist at common, or paper, where cards like Desert existed at common? It was a conundrum. If you do the former, it certainly is a bit odd and hard to explain. But if you did the latter, some decks would show up that didn't look like Magic Online decks at all, and people couldn't take Magic Online decks to use in paper. It was a tricky situation. After years of being torn between the two, in 2019, we finally made the call to do a unification. Pauper legality would be Magic Online and paper together. Hooray! People rejoiced. Why the history lesson? Well, recently we've had a lot of questions about Pioneer Masters, and specifically Arena's impact on Pauper. Are there any plans to make those cards legal? The answer is no. Pauper's legality is only the way it is because it started on Magic Online. It's a weird grandfathered-in quirk to not just kick out cards that have become staples. Someday, if all the relevant cards are printed at Common and Paper, come on Common Chainer's Edict, I could even see ditching the Magic Online clause altogether. Additionally, Arena does not always offer Pauper, and when it does, it's a substantially different format than what exists elsewhere. So while those reprints are cool, no, there are no plans to bring them to Pauper. That only makes it more confusing when now there are 3 different places you have to check cards for legality for. Anyway, there's a bit of history for you. Just something to mention while we're here. Thanks for watching, everybody, and let us know your thoughts on if you'd want to see anything banned in the comments down below. You can expect another update around the next time we check in with all formats and the banned and restricted list. On behalf of the entire Pauper format panel, thank you for playing the format and for all your notes and thoughts. And until next time, I hope you have joy playing Pauper. You got this.
The first of them, the Fearsome Flock. This wild card really doesn't fit on a Magic playtest card, but that's right, who's counting anyway? The prompt was something like a crow that steals shiny things, and here we are. And yes, making it a treasure grants it the ability to sacrifice for a mana, and makes it lose all other abilities. Go steal all their stuff. Have you ever wanted to win the game through counter magic? Well, the